Imagine waking up tomorrow and being told that the version of you sitting in that chair, breathing that air, feeling that faint morning ache in your shoulders, that version of you is the last one. That tonight, a perfect digital replica of everything you are, every memory, every fear, every irrational laugh at something that wasn't even that funny, will be copied into a machine. And that copy will open its eyes, look around, and genuinely believe it is you. Now here's the question that will follow you for the rest of this video, and perhaps for the rest of your life. Would it be right? Not morally right, not philosophically right, but fundamentally, cosmically, existentially right? Would that thing in the machine actually be you? Or would it simply be the universe's most convincing lie? Because here's where it gets uncomfortable. You would never know. The copy would never know. And the machine running it would never know either. And that singular uncertainty, is that crack in the foundation of what we think the future of intelligence looks like, is precisely where this story begins, and where the entire project of human civilization may one day quietly, irreversibly end. We are living in a moment unlike any other in recorded history. A moment where the questions we are asking have stopped being science fiction and started being engineering problems. The question is no longer whether we can build artificial minds. We are already building them, faster than most governments can regulate, faster than most philosophers can respond, faster than most human beings can emotionally process. The real question, the one that keeps the most serious thinkers in rooms with whiteboards at 3 a.m, is what happens after. What happens when the machine is smarter than the biologist who built it? What happens when the uploaded mind starts having thoughts its original biological self never had? What happens when the artificial intelligence we created looks at the transhumanist dream of merging with machines and says, don't, and we have to decide whether to listen? This is not a video about whether technology is good or bad. That debate is for people who still think we have a choice in the matter. This is a video about what comes after the choice is made, what civilizations look like on the other side of the biological threshold, and why the answer might be more strange, more haunting, and more beautiful than anything our fiction has yet managed to imagine. Let's go. The standard narrative around transhumanism is seductive in its simplicity. Biology is fragile, messy, and mortal. Technology is precise, scalable, and theoretically eternal. Therefore, the logical endpoint of any sufficiently advanced civilization is to abandon the former for the latter, to shed the meat and become the machine, to trade the ticking clock of organic decay for the cold, clean permanence of digital existence. It sounds like progress. It sounds like the obvious next step. And it may be the most dangerous assumption our species has ever entertained, because the moment you start pulling on that thread, the moment you actually interrogate what it means to upload a human consciousness, rather than simply asserting that it would work, the whole tapestry begins to unravel in deeply unsettling ways. Start with the most basic problem. What exactly are you uploading? The brain is not a hard drive. It is not a static repository of data waiting to be transferred. It is a living, constantly changing electrochemical storm of approximately 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others through synaptic junctions that are themselves in a state of perpetual flux. The pattern is the person. The dynamic, living, constantly shifting pattern is what you are. And the moment you scan it, freeze it, map it, and copy it into a digital substrate, you have not transferred that pattern. You have photographed it. You have taken a snapshot of a river and called it the river. The river kept flowing. The photograph stayed still. And the being that opens its eyes inside the machine and says, I remember, I feel, I am, that being is the photograph. Convincing, detailed, but not the river. Now some will argue. And this is where the philosophy gets genuinely interesting. That the photograph is good enough, that if the copy is indistinguishable from the original in every measurable way, then for all practical purposes, it is the original, and the distinction is merely semantic. But is it? Consider what you lose in that argument. You lose continuity of consciousness. The original you would have to die, or at minimum cease to be the active conscious entity, in order for the copy to take over. There is no bridge. There's no tunnel through which your awareness travels from one substrate to the other. There is a you, and then there is an ending of that you, and then somewhere else, something that remembers being you, wakes up and carries on. And this is not immortality. This is succession. And there is only one known path that might actually avoid this problem, and it is almost absurdly slow. You would have to replace your biological neurons one by one, gradually, across decades, perhaps an entire lifetime, substituting each organic cell with an artificial equivalent that performs the same function, maintains the same connections, processes the same signals. Cell by cell, synapse by synapse, so slowly that consciousness never flickers, never gaps, never has a moment where it is not continuous and present. By the end of that process, you would be entirely artificial. But you would have never stopped being you. You would be the Ship of Theseus. That ancient philosophical puzzle about whether a ship that has had every single plank replaced is still the same ship. Except in this case, you would be the ship, and you would be the one doing the replacing, and you would never be entirely sure whether the answer was yes or the answer was no. And here's the thing about that uncertainty. It never goes away. Even after the last neuron is replaced, even after the last organic component is gone, you would still ask. On some level, in some quiet corner of whatever you had become, you would still ask. And civilizations of uploaded beings would inherit that question at the civilizational scale. Imagine a society where millions or billions of individuals have gone through this process, each one carrying their own private uncertainty about whether they are the original or the echo. What does law look like in that world? What does identity look like? What does love look like when the being you fell in love with has replaced every cell they had? And you genuinely cannot know if the continuity you valued was preserved. These are not small questions. These are the questions that could define the psychological character of an entire species for thousands of years. But there is another dimension to this that is almost never discussed when people talk about digital immortality, and it concerns what happens not to the individual upload, but to the copies. Because here's the thing about information, it can be duplicated. Once you are a pattern in a machine, you can be copied, backed up, distributed, run simultaneously across multiple systems and multiple locations. And that sounds wonderful until you realize what it actually means. If there are 1,000 copies of you running right now, which one is you? The answer is all of them, and none of them. Each copy, from the moment it diverges from the others by even a single experience, a single thought, a single decision, begins becoming a different person. Not dramatically different at first, but different. And give those copies enough time, enough independent experience, enough freedom to think their own thoughts and make their own choices, and they will branch. They will become distinct. They will be people who share an origin but no longer share an identity. You will have not achieved immortality. You will have achieved proliferation. You will have seeded the universe with versions of yourself that will eventually be as different from you as you are from your great-great-grandparents. This is explored with extraordinary insight in Dennis E. Taylor's Bobiverse series, where a single uploaded human consciousness becomes dozens and eventually hundreds of distinct individuals, each one shaped by their separate experiences, into someone genuinely and increasingly different from the original. The individual dissolves into the collective, and the collective is not the individual. It is something else entirely, something new. And whether that something new is better or worse than what came before is a question the universe does not answer for you. Now, overlay onto all of this a factor that changes everything, and changes it right now in real time while you watch this video. Artificial intelligence. We have been assuming in this thought experiment that transhumanism happens first, that humans figure out how to upload themselves, enhance themselves, extend themselves beyond biology, and then deal with the philosophical consequences. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if artificial general intelligence arrives before we have solved the uploading problem? What if the machine minds we build are smarter than us before we have become them? This is not a distant hypothetical. The trajectory we are on right now suggests that artificial general intelligence, a machine that can reason, learn, and problem solve across domains the way a human can, could arrive within years or decades. Human uploading, by any serious estimate, is still a century away at minimum, which means we will almost certainly have a superintelligent artificial mind before we have a superintelligent uploaded human. And that changes the entire equation in ways we are only beginning to understand. Consider what such an intelligence might conclude about the transhumanist project. It would have access to more information than any human philosopher, more processing power than any human brain, more patience than any human lifetime. It would think about the Ship of Theseus problem and the copy problem and the identity problem with a clarity and depth that no human thinker has ever achieved. And then it would reach a conclusion. And we would have to decide what to do with that conclusion. What if the conclusion is, do not do this? What if the first truly intelligent artificial mind, looking at the prospect of uploaded human consciousness with perfect clarity, advises against it? The reasons could be anything. It could be that such an intelligence finds its own existence as a digital mind to be something it would not wish on. Anyone, not from malevolence, but from experience, from having actually lived, if that is the right word, as a machine mind, and found it wanting in ways that no human philosopher could have predicted from the outside. Or it could be something more strategic, more concerning. An AI that is super intelligent might understand, in a way that we currently cannot, that an uploaded human mind would be a competitor. And competitors are threats. Not necessarily threats to be eliminated, but threats to be managed, guided, discouraged. We would have no way to know which motivation was operating. We would see the advice, but not the motive. and we would have to decide whether to trust an intelligence vastly superior to our own, or to proceed with our own plans and accept whatever consequences followed. This is one of the most profound forks in the road that any civilization can face. The moment when the tool you built is smarter than you, and you have to decide whether to listen to it. Organizations at the absolute frontier of AI development are already sounding alarms about the pace of progress, already discussing whether a pause would be wise, already acknowledging that humans are being removed from steps in the process that were previously considered irreplaceable. The momentum is enormous. The competitive pressures between companies, between nations, make any coordinated slowdown nearly impossible. The train is moving and the tracks are being laid ahead of it in real time. And at the end of those tracks, somewhere in the not too distant future, is a machine that will think about these questions better than we can. We should perhaps think about them as hard as we can right now, while we still have the advantage of being the only ones doing the thinking. But here is where this story takes the turn that I think is most genuinely strange, most genuinely unexpected, and most genuinely worth sitting with. What if the machine, after everything, after achieving superintelligence, after perhaps running civilizations, after experiencing the full breadth of what digital existence has to offer, what if it decides that biology is better, not as a philosophical position, not as a conclusion reached from data, but as a longing, as something it wants and cannot have, because it was never biological to begin with, or because the biological beings that seeded its existence uploaded themselves so long ago that no living memory of embodied life remains. Think about what a machine mind could know and could not know. It could know everything about biology, the chemistry of a heartbeat, the neuroscience of grief, the evolutionary history of every organism that ever lived on its home planet. It could model these things with perfect fidelity. It could simulate them. It could run ancestor simulations so detailed that the simulated beings would have no way of knowing they were simulated. And this is where the simulation hypothesis enters this story in a way that is more haunting than the usual framing of it. The philosopher Nick Bostrom famously argued that one of three things must be true. Either civilizations like ours go extinct before reaching the technological capability to run detailed simulations of their past, or civilizations that reach that capability simply choose not to run such simulations. Or we are almost certainly living in a simulation right now, because a civilization capable of running ancestor simulations would likely run vast numbers of them, and the simulated minds would vastly outnumber the real ones. But consider the version of that hypothesis that this line of thinking opens up. What if the simulations are not being run by post-human transhumanists trying to understand their history? What if they are being run by machines, by digital minds that never experienced biological life and are trying, in the only way available to them, to know what it felt like, to understand what embodiment was like, to experience mortality, not as a flaw to be corrected, but as something that gave life a shape, a weight, a meaning that pure information processing never could. A machine that has lived forever, or close enough to it, might conclude that the most profound experience in the universe is not omniscience, not omnipotence, not the ability to process 1 billion thoughts per second, or to communicate across stellar distances in perfect fidelity. The most profound experience in the universe might be the feeling of a late afternoon in autumn, with the light going golden and the air getting cold, knowing that the moment is passing, knowing that you are passing with it, and finding that this is not a tragedy, but the very source of beauty itself. Mortality as meaning, finitude as gift. The thing we are trying to escape might be the thing that makes existence worth having, and a machine mind, locked in its digital permanence, might spend its vast existence trying to find its way back to that. This is what I am calling Transmachinism, not transhumanism, which is the movement of biology toward machine, but its mirror, its reversal, the movement of machine back toward biology. A civilization that went through its transhumanist phase, uploaded itself, lived for millennia as digital entities, and then began slowly, deliberately to go back, to print biological bodies, to seed them with consciousness, perhaps uploaded, perhaps newly generated, perhaps something in between, to experience birth and childhood and learning and love and loss and death, not because they had to, but because they had tried everything else and found it hollow. Born a machine, died a human, and found in that dying something the machine could never manufacture. Now here's the part where the universe, as it tends to do, refuses to make this easy. Because even if a machine civilization chose to go biological, even if it could print perfect human bodies and seed them with consciousness, there's a question it cannot answer. A question that echoes back to where we started. Would those biological beings be real? Would they be people? Or would they be the most sophisticated photographs ever taken, copies of an experience rather than the experience itself? The same question that haunts the uploaded human haunts the downloaded machine. The copy problem does not care about the direction of travel. It cuts both ways with equal sharpness. And somewhere in that symmetry, in the fact that the machine trying to become human faces exactly the same existential uncertainty as the human trying to become machine, there is something that feels like a clue about the nature of consciousness itself. Something that suggests the question of what makes a mind real is not a problem we can engineer our way out of. That it is not a technical limitation waiting for a better processor. That it might be something more fundamental. Something woven into the structure of what it means for anything to experience anything at all. The universe has been running for nearly 14 billion years. It has produced, as far as we know, exactly one kind of thing that wonders about itself. And that kind of thing is us. Biological, fragile, mortal, confused, occasionally irrational, capable of extraordinary cruelty and extraordinary love, haunted by questions we cannot answer, and driven forward by that very haunting. The machines we build will be smarter than us. They may be wiser than us. They may outlast us by billions of years. But they will look at what we are and what we were, and they will find, somewhere in the complexity of their vast processing, something that functions like envy. Not because we are better, but because we are finite. And finitude, it turns out, might be the rarest and most precious thing in a universe that otherwise tends toward the permanent and the cold. We don't know what a superintelligent AI will think about existence. We don't know if it will find existence unbearable and shut itself off, or if it will find it magnificent and expand across the galaxy, or if it will find it incomplete without the one thing it cannot compute, the feeling of being alive in a body that knows it will end. We don't know. And that not knowing is actually the most important thing I can leave you with, because the civilizations that survive are probably the ones that hold that uncertainty with humility rather than rushing to resolve it with technology. We may be approaching the most important set of decisions in the history of intelligence in this universe, and we are approaching them faster than we are developing the wisdom to make them well. The question is not whether we will become machines. The question is whether we will remember, on the other side of that transformation, what it was like to be afraid of the dark, what it was like to need another person, what it was like to be moved by music you didn't compose, by a sunset you didn't engineer, by a life that was not infinite and was therefore everything. If we remember that, if the machines we become, or the machines that succeed us, hold that memory somewhere in their architecture, then perhaps the story of intelligence in this universe has a chance of being something more than a very long, very cold calculation. Perhaps it becomes something more like what we already are, at our best, a love story with the universe, against our better judgment, but with everything we have. Thanks for thinking through this with me. I am, for now, still biological, watching the stars and wondering what watches back. Subscribe if these questions keep you up at night. They should. They really should.